Hey guys, and welcome back to the channel. The first thing I'd like to do is apologize for the poor lighting. I'm actually filming this episode from my hotel room in DC. I will be back home tomorrow, but I wanted to make sure I got this episode out in time. So today we're going to be talking about vintage watches. That's coming up right after this. So the first thing I'd like to do is just take a look at a couple of the vintage pieces that I've been looking at and tell you why I'm looking at those pieces. This is one of the first pieces that I'm looking at, and this isn't exactly the piece that I'm going to get, but it's along the lines of what I'm thinking. What's more important for me is that it is a 1956. So the significance for me for 1956 is that I am Hispanic and Cuban descent on my mother's side, and my grandfather brought his family to the United States to live permanently in 1956. Before that, I mean, he was already coming to the US. He actually worked as an accountant for the New York Yankees. But 1956 is the year that he established our family in the United States, and then my mom was born a few years later. So for me, I would really like to have a vintage piece from 1956. I love the Tudor Prince oyster date. When I get a vintage piece, I do want it to be something that I'm actually going to wear, which means that for practical purposes for me, I need it to have the date. But I love this one. Very, very nice piece, and it's exactly what I would be looking for. So the next one that I would like to get is a Rolex Datejust, and the year for this vintage piece is 1983. As some of you guys might be able to guess, 1983 is my birth year. I'm not a huge fan of Rolex dress pieces, but as I've been playing around on Instagram and looking at other people's pictures, I love the look of the vintage Datejusts, particularly on the aftermarket brown leather bands. Typically not a huge fan of the fluted bezel, but the more that I've been looking at pictures of it, the more that I've seen them on the aftermarket straps, the more that I've thought, I do think that I quite like this. So 1983 is the year that I've been looking at for the Datejust. And this is just an example of two vintage pieces, and they'd likely probably only be my only two vintage pieces that I would want to get. So now that we've checked these out, let's get into talking about some of the things to keep in mind when we're buying vintage pieces. Alright, so because I've started looking at these pieces now, I started to do a lot of research on vintage pieces, things to look out for, places to get vintage watches. Instagram is a huge resource for a lot of vintage watch dealers. There are a couple things that you're going to want to keep in mind, and I want to go over a few of those now. So the first thing you're going to want to ask is where the watch came from, how many owners they had, if possible, okay? That's just good information, background information for you to have, to get an idea of, maybe what the watch has been put through. The second thing you're going to want to do, if it's not clear in the pictures, if you're not able to see the serial number in the picture, go ahead and ask the seller for that serial information. Now, you can't do this with all manufacturers, but with a lot of manufacturers, especially your major brands, you can always contact the manufacturer to verify that that's a good serial number, that it's a genuine serial number, that it's not a piece that's been stolen, and it doesn't hurt to do that background legwork yourself just to give you a little extra peace of mind on what it is that you're going to be putting your money into. The next question is your watch genuine? This might seem trivial, but for me, it's worth asking. And listen, if you can't get a straight answer or the seller is offended by you asking, then maybe, and this is just me, maybe you should go to another seller. If I'm selling a piece and somebody asks for additional information and I don't have anything to hide or any reason to be bothered, especially since it's their money that they're passing on, I would have no problem providing that information. So it doesn't hurt to ask the question. You should get a straight response back. If you get anything that's beating around the bush, if I were you, I'd just move on to the next seller or wait for the piece to come up again from somebody else. Next is checking the seller's rating. This might be more relevant, particularly on eBay. If I were you, me personally, I would stick to a rating of 99% and above. If it's not, I would rather just move on for my personal peace of mind and find a better rated seller. Pay with your credit card or PayPal. The reason you're going to want to do that is because your credit card and PayPal are going to provide that additional buyer protection. That's something that I think will just give you peace of mind at the end of the day. If there's any issues with the piece, it wasn't what you thought it was, there turned out to be problems later and you cannot resolve it one-to-one through communication with the seller, that's where having done the transaction through PayPal and your credit card is going to make sure that you're going to get your money back if you don't get what you thought you were paying for. The last one I have on here is if you decide that you're going to buy a watch, take screenshots of all the information from the posting, whether it's an eBay posting, Chrono24 posting, Watch You Seek posting, anywhere that the watch has been advertised or posted, I would take screenshots of everything exactly as it was advertised. This might end up coming in handy if later down the line there's an issue with what they said you were going to get or the condition that the piece was in versus what you actually end up getting. If you wait too long to do this and you get the piece and it's not what you thought it was going to be, that post could have been taken down, information could have been changed or deleted by the seller. So in those instances, if it's something that you're going to want to get, I would take screenshots and just hang on to them till you get the piece and you're satisfied with what you got. It is as advertised. With all that in mind, there's a couple websites that I recommend that I think are good, particularly for vintage pieces. The first one is Chrono24. You have information on how long they've been registered, how many good sales, how many other sellers are recommending them. Then there is also jamesedition.com. Now, there's the only downsides to using Chrono24 and jamesedition.com is that unlike eBay, these are sellers that are likely to know a lot about watches. Obviously, they're dealers, so you're not going to get this incredible good deal that you might end up being able to snatch up on eBay. So it's a little bit of a trade-off. I think you're safer on Jamestown and Chrono24, but you're not going to get that killer deal that you might be able to find on eBay. For me, it may be worth a peace of mind, but you'll have to make that decision or judgment call yourself. There is also bobswatches.com, and that website is a really well-known seller, particularly for vintage Rolex pieces. So I am going to put links to all these in the description below, so if you want to go ahead and check any of those out, you can. If any of you guys have any other tips on buying vintage, other things to keep in mind for any of us that might be looking, any other sites that you recommend that you think are good places to look for vintage pieces, please go ahead and post it in the comment section below. Also, I would really love to know, what's your vintage? What's your vintage piece? What's your vintage year? Why? What's the significance to you? If you enjoyed this video or found it useful, don't be shy. Go ahead and please give it a thumbs up and share it on social media. So that's it for this one, guys. CG out.